recently, I've been reflecting a whole lot more on how well written a lot of different Dreamworks characters seem to be. I've talked about a lot of different characters up to this point. I made a video that made a case for Hiccup perhaps being the most relatable and real protagonist in Dreamworks history, and perhaps across all of animation. I talked about how Gob is actually a massively underrated character in terms of his overall role in the story, and deserves more love in that respect. Then most recently, I made a video talking about Stoic the Vast, and how he's such a well-written character that's massively compelling and has a whole lot of depth. The type of character who underpins much of the storytelling, and who even after his death in the second film, plays a huge role in how the characters continue to act and how the story plays out. However, I did realise that a lot of my focus had almost entirely been on characters from the How to Train Your Dragon franchise, and I don't really know why, to tell you the truth. I guess perhaps that's just the franchise I've most engaged with as I got older, and thus I was able to more easily deep dive into the characters and themes. That being said, now I do want to have a look at some of the other franchises in the Dreamworks catalogue. I would say that of their big franchises, whilst How to Train Your Dragon is probably my favourite in this day and age, and thus the easiest for me to talk about, historically, I've also really enjoyed Shrek and Kung Fu Panda. I think Shrek probably hits higher highs in terms of my enjoyment, as the first two films are two of the best animated films to be ever made, and whilst the latter two films didn't quite hit the same, the spin-off Puss in Boots films are top tier as well. Kung Fu Panda, though, at least for me, is probably a franchise that I enjoy more on average. I don't think there's really a bad Kung Fu Panda film. I mean, I think the first two are probably better than the latter two, but 3 and 4 are still good movies, just a little bit more forgettable as a whole than 1 and 2. So today we are going to be talking through a character in Kung Fu Panda, who I think is simply really well written and massively engaging. An appreciation video for Po's dad, Mr. Ping the Goose, who operates his noodle shop. Before we dive into the story or anything like that, I want to start off by talking about Mr. Ping's voice acting and design choice. Both of them, of course, being a masterclass in character building. In all honesty, Mr. Ping is the man. Or the goose, I suppose. But yes, the voice acting. There are a few voices that are quite as iconic as James Hong, in my opinion. He has this quality about him, you know? A truly unforgettable voice, and one that I think could have easily become grating and annoying simply due to the pitch and also the dialogue he had to work with. However, he was just able to inject that special something into things, you know? He was able to layer so much emotion into the performance, taking what could have easily been some stereotypical overbearing dad into an emotional, loving father who's simply frightened for his son to be putting himself in danger. Then there's his visual design. Whoever decided the foster father of this giant panda should be a tiny little goose with a squeaky voice was absolutely cooking with gas, in my opinion. It creates such a perfect visual contrast and ends up looking really damn cute. So already there's that. But there's so much more to love about this goose, and a lot to love about the way he was written. When we first meet Mr. Ping, he's presented, like I said, as a fairly over-the-top parent who bulldozes his son and has fairly high expectations. Despite that, though, it's presented in an endearing way. He's never really showcased to be somebody you're positioned to dislike by the narrative. At the start of the movie, Po comes downstairs and asks whether his dad has ever dreamed of doing something else other than making noodle soup, and he says that he once dreamed of running away to make tofu, but it was a silly dream in the end. He gets super excited when Po lies about having dreams about martial arts, instead saying he had a dream about noodles. He claims that this means that Po is ready to fully start his journey to take over the family noodle business in one of the funniest pieces of dialogue across the entire franchise. I think what separates Ping from so many other film or TV parents that expect a certain thing from their kid is that here, there's no harsh expectation, you know? You can easily see that Ping genuinely loves and dotes on his son in a way that's rather uncommon to see on film, or at least it was in the mid-2000s. Plus, whilst yeah, there is that weight of expectation that's put on Po to follow his dad into the family business, the way that's presented to the audience is through comedy, such as through the discussion of the noodle dream, or Ping telling Po to take the noodle cart up to the Jade Temple to cash in on the big gathering to choose the Dragon Warrior, with the temple being up this huge flight of stairs. Thus, it doesn't necessarily position you to dislike this guy or feel that Po's being hard done by. It's just meant to be very funny, and it is. Eventually, of course, Po realizes that he's not going to be able to lug that cart all the way up the hill and still be able to see the Dragon Warrior, and so he leaves it behind to try to sneak in. Since he was so slow, he's been locked out of the temple, and so the only thing for it is to try to use fireworks to blast himself into the sky so he can see who's chosen. His dad comes up just as he's about to light the fuse, and so Po tells him that he hadn't had the noodle dream at all, and that he actually loves Kung Fu. The fireworks end up fizzling out and not exploding, which leaves Po in a depressing and awkward situation. Once again, I think it would have been very easy to have Mr. Ping go into full overbearing dad mode, yelling at his son and telling him I told you so. It's the classic way to frame a scene like this after all, but the story doesn't go in that direction. Instead, he gives him a little bit of comfort, he hands over his apron and says that maybe they should go back to work. Could he have been more nurturing here? Probably, but I think it adds to the complexity of his character. On the one hand, he is this lovely, kind father who nurtures Po, but at the same time, he does bulldoze him and doesn't give him a chance to really tell him what he wants to do with his life. There is that undercurrent of dad knows best. You don't really get to see him across all of the film, just in small snippets, because in the end, the film is Kung Fu Panda, not Noodle Fu Goose. But by having him be supportive enough initially, it showcases that Po has a really good and stable relationship with his dad that in turn helps him start to win over the rest of the Furious Five, both through the personality his father cultivated and also his culinary skill. But then on the other hand, you also have him be full of these expectations, which crafts a complicated character in a very small amount of scenes, many of which he isn't even in. Simply by watching Po and matching it up with what we saw of Mr. Ping originally, it enhances his character quite a lot. It makes him very compelling overall, and then I really like that it was Mr. Ping that gives Po his big heroic hype-up moment. He found out his son wanted to be a kung fu warrior moments before they're separated, and then Ping thinks Po's been arrested. When Po comes back, whilst Ping feels sorry for him, he also pretty much expects that Po's crashed out of kung fu, and that he's going to come back and take over the shop and properly become Ping's apprentice. Once again, typical logic would dictate that eventually Po's going to stand up for himself against a parent who thinks he knows best and run away after yelling at him, and only after he proved that he could succeed in spite of his father's doubts would Ping approve. Think about how it worked out with Hiccup and Stoic in How to Train Your Dragon. Hiccup had to prove himself to his dad after his dad tried his own way and failed. Only then did Stoic change his perspective and realize who his son was really meant to be. I actually think it's really refreshing that Ping doesn't need this sort of realization to come to the conclusion that Po was meant to have a different life than making noodles. Using a culinary analogy, he tells Po that the secret ingredient that completes his famous secret ingredient noodle soup is nothing. Instead, all he has to do is tell people the soup is special, and they're going to believe it's true. He uses psychology to make the food intriguing, with the quality of the cooking doing the rest. Thus, he's able to make Po realize that if this is true for noodle soup, then maybe you can apply that to kung fu as well. That the only thing that Po needs in order to become the Dragon Warrior is to believe that he's the Dragon Warrior. That you don't need some mystical and magical power to make you special. So this is a pretty beautiful moment in the film for me. One that makes Ping and the writing surrounding him really stand out from the crowd. Then they have a big hug to end the film after Tai Lung's been defeated, and it's just awesome. Really, across this whole film, I just love his character, his dynamic with Po, and then his own mini arc where he's able to grow and change and let his son go and spread his wings, so to speak. In the end, I think that what makes Ping unique is that his story often involves him tackling real-world parental issues that could easily steer his character into toxic territory. But with his personality and affection to Po, it softens these issues and changes the dynamic of the story quite a lot. We then move on to the second film. Mr. Ping is extremely proud of his son for becoming the Dragon Warrior and protecting the valley from Tai Lung, and has since rebranded his entire shop to be a celebrity tie-in. It's the childhood home of the Dragon Warrior, the place where he got his start, now turned into a tourist attraction, and if people want to have some noodles while seeing the sights, why, sit down and grab a bowl. I like this. We once again get to see the canny and cunning side of Ping, like we did when he tries to force Po to man the noodle cart at the Dragon Warrior selection ceremony. I think this type of thing makes his character seem a bit more three-dimensional and complex, and I guess goes to show how you can run a successful business for so long while seeming like a massive softie. Once again, Ping is a key part in making Kung Fu Panda 2 feel like Kung Fu Panda, having absurd and goofy comedy overlaid onto some pretty heavy and serious storylines. As we said, he's gone full fan club for Po, and when Po brings up a dream that he had about the past, Ping decides that now is finally time to tell him the truth about his origins. He tells him about how he'd ordered some radishes for his shop, but by the time he came out to grab them, they were all gone. The only thing that was left was an empty box with a baby panda inside. He waits around for a little while to see if anybody was going to come and claim him, and in the end he decides that the only thing for it is for him to adopt Po. Yes, he knows this baby for all of a couple of hours, and in the end he decides, screw it, he's mine now, and he loves radishes so much that he can have them all, and my customers can get stuffed. I actually think this is such a beautiful and wholesome backstory that helps to massively soften the idea that he'd kept the truth of Po being adopted from him from his entire life, and also the fact that Po's entire family was brutally massacred. When he hears that Po and the Furious Five are heading to Gongmen City to confront Shen and stop him from deploying his anti-kung fu weapon across all of China, Ping packs up Po's stuff with a particular emphasis on things that will remind Po of Ping. By this point, when Ping's on screen, it is 100% guaranteed that you're going to be feeling the feels. I'm continually in awe of how across the course of this franchise, they've been able to craft this character who is physically affectionate to his adult son without it coming across as overly pathetic or weird or clingy. They make you feel genuine emotions. And he's standing alone in the middle of the road as Po and the Five depart. You feel that. Whilst he once again disappears from the narrative in person, his impact is still felt. He serves as an emotional center for Po's character, which is extremely important. I mean, let's be honest with ourselves. Po is a character whose primary purpose is to make us laugh. His design, the way he moves, he talks and interacts with everybody. The toilet humor, the goofiness. I'm not saying that it gets old across the course of the film, but it could leave him feeling a bit two-dimensional if he never evolved beyond this point. I think that's part of the reason why Ping is such an important piece of the puzzle. It lets Po have more serious moments on that emotional level, and as such, I think it adds depth to his character and a lot of motivation for his story. I mean, that ending embrace in the second movie is an all-timer of a moment. I honestly think it only gets better from here. He continues to be a source of support in Po's life with his actions and words constantly having a positive effect on events. In the third film, when they meet Lee, Ping's worried that Po's going to drift away from him now that he has his panda father back, and so he stows away in Po's pack to come with him to the secret panda village. Here, he once again takes up the charge of keeping Po fed, whilst trying to compete for Po's attention. He also saves the baby pandas from getting themselves killed in the kitchen, which was a lot of fun. However, his really big moment comes when Tigress comes to the village to warn Po the valley's fallen to Kai. The whole point of them coming to this place was so that Po could learn the power of Chi from his biological biological father, but it turns out he lied, and so now Po has to potentially fight without it, which is a fight he might not be able to win. In this way, Ping has won. He's the true father who didn't betray Po, and who raised him to be the type of person that are going to face insurmountable odds without much hope of victory. But yet he goes to Lee and he tells him that Po is the type of son who will forgive him in time, and convinces him that in order to win, Po's going to need both his fathers by his side. Once again, Ping is delivering the goods, as without his kindness and compassion, they would have lost. Lee would never have been inspired to try to rally the pandas to fight and redeem himself, and Po would have lost and the world would have ended. So really, Ping saved the world yet again, just by being a good dad who looks out for his son's interests. This then leads into the fourth film, where once again, he is laying down the truth. Po is afraid of change, and he doesn't want to give up being the Dragon Warrior. But Ping's able to get through to him yet again by telling him that life is full of changes, like when he adopted Po. But change doesn't have to be a bad thing. Then he even teams up to fight alongside Zhen, Li, and the criminals to help Po against the chameleon. In the grand scheme of things, Ping is probably a minor character, but I truly think that he's one of the best and most important parts of the franchise, who's been written in a way that's super compelling and interesting. Even as he helps Po grow and change and find the answer to the big questions, Ping is also growing and changing as a character. It's not just across each film, but also within the series itself. His story in each film is stacking upon each other to craft an extremely compelling, complex, and layered character. He's got to be among the best written characters in the Dreamworks catalogue, particularly for the amount of screen time and overall plot relevance he actually has, and in a time where Dreamworks has really fallen off in terms of prominence, I think looking back and celebrating the glory days is all you can really do now. Here's to you, Mr. Ping, a classic of the screen. With all that being said though, these have just been my opinions, and I'd like to hear yours. What do you think of the character of Mr. Ping? Do you agree with what I've said today? Maybe you disagree, maybe you think his character sucks and is badly written. I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.